My wife has been missing for 15 years, until she called my phone out of the blue. I could hear her clearly, now. Panic rose in my chest. I don't believe in the supernatural, but all signs were pointing to something horrifying. My mind was a mess, debating whether to stay, out of morbid curiosity, or run as fast as I could out of the door and never look back. Daniel? Daniel, thank goodness I finally reached you. The shrill voice cut through my panic. Daniel, it's me. It's Sarah. Are you there? It sounded even closer to me now, like the source of the voice could only be a few meters away. Hello? I call out, hearing slow, small footsteps. Hello? Is anyone there? I stay rooted to the spot, my legs paralyzed in fear. I still didn't know what was happening here, and I wasn't about to risk my life. Suddenly, it was as if someone had flicked a switch. The loud, eerie rustling came to a stop, almost being sucked out of the room like a vacuum. I noticed that the footsteps had stopped too, and after a few moments of terrified silence, the voice also seemed to have gone. I started to walk downstairs, my hands still shaking. What was that? What just happened to me? Could there be a chance that after all these years, I was going crazy? I rushed downstairs to the phone, yanking the wires out and disconnecting it. I couldn't let a scam caller get inside my head. I didn't leave the house at all that day. The fear still made my head spin and my heart pound in my chest. There was no logical explanation for what had happened. When I woke up the next day, it was like something had changed. Something was different, and it wasn't in my mind. It was almost like, overnight, everything had shifted. I wasn't an avid reader, but I had a small bookshelf in my bedroom, with about 5 or so books on it. For some reason, it was looking a little empty. Was that just my imagination? I got out of bed and walked downstairs. I needed to get a glass of water. Clearly, my mind was going into overdrive. I was starting to become paranoid. I opened my drawer to get a butter knife for my slice of toast, when something caught my eye. An empty space in my knife rack. Every other knife was in the slot, apart from one. I could feel a lump in my throat. Knives don't just go missing. I pulled my mobile phone out of my pocket, not even daring to touch the landline, and called my friend Adam. I really was going crazy. Some sort of delayed guilt response, I guess. Whatever it was, I was afraid. Adam, I hissed into my phone. I don't know what's happening to me, but I need you to come over. I think I'm going mad. Adam promised to be on his way, and I didn't have to wait long for him to be at my door. When I let him in, he seemed concerned. What happened? He asked me. Your call really freaked me out. You sounded scared. I think I'm going crazy. I explained, as we sat down. I'm seeing things, imagining things. I think it's something to do with Sarah. Losing your wife is tough, Adam agreed. Right. He doesn't know what really happened to Sarah. I know how that feels. 10 years ago, Adam's wife, Laura, had suffered a fate similar to Sarah. She had gone out to work one day, and had never returned. It was tough on me as Laura, being her best friend, was the closest thing I had to my Sarah. It was 15 years ago, I said, wide-eyed. How is it only hitting me now? About a year after Laura went missing, I really broke down, Adam told me. I started getting really paranoid, and suspicious. It took a few years of therapy for me to fully accept everything. I nodded, pretending to understand. Therapy won't help me. It seems like nothing will help me. I pretended to listen to the rest of Adam's advice, until he had to leave. I told him that I would try out some of his coping methods, but in reality, I had no intention of doing so. That night, I found myself tossing and turning, obsessing over everything that had happened, the phone calls, the disappearances. I couldn't sleep. Begrudgingly, I got out of bed and walked over to my medication cabinet, in search of some sleeping pills. I didn't use them often, just when I couldn't sleep. I felt around in the cabinet for the meds, but they were nowhere. I flicked on the light, and looked again. They were missing. This wasn't my mind playing tricks on me, this was happening. I raced down to my basement. I don't step foot in the basement often, it just reminds me of everything. It reminds me of them, because that's where they are. The victims. That's right, I said victims. Multiple. It started with only Sarah, but I couldn't live with myself knowing that her lover was still out there. The man who had tempted my Sarah away. He had to go. I lured him to my house, with a great plan. Once he was there, I got him a drink, and we talked. A drink, laced with sleeping meds. He was dead within the hour. The next one was Laura. Adam's wife. She didn't just go missing, she was unalived. And I did it. I had a good reason. She found me out, she found out what I did to Sarah. She had rushed over to my house to confront me. In a panic, I unalived her. I unalived her with the book from my bedroom. One sharp blow to the head and she was dead. And the knife was Sarah. I didn't want her to be afraid, I couldn't have that. She was my Sarah, and I loved her. I didn't want to frighten her. So I stabbed her in the back, like she stabbed me in the back by cheating. I did it with that knife from my knife rack. She fell to the floor like a sleeping angel, and died. And the knife was in my hands. But I didn't put it there. My vision was clouded, but I could see that I was standing in my basement. How did I get here? I don't remember the past few minutes, but my hand's close around the bottle of sleeping meds. The sleeping meds? I try to bring it up to my face, my entire body swaying. My sight keeps going and reappearing, and all I can feel is the blood rushing around my body. I feel a small, heavy object. I'm holding the book now. But that's impossible. I drop the book to the floor, my legs suddenly buckling from under me. I fall to the ground, just like each of my victims, my eyes closing slowly. I can't feel a thing anymore. I imagine this is what happened to them. I imagine that this is what they felt, too. Just before my eyelids close, I almost think I can see something in front of me. A face I know so well. Sarah. Lawyers, what's your sweetest moment in court? I had a case against a man who nearly took his wife's life. The attack was so bad she was in a coma for 5 days, but woke up. His name was Joe. I was hired by Joe's brother-in-law, the brother of the wife that Joe hurt. My client was also Joe's ex-business partner. Joe was a shady business partner. My client took it to the business part of it to court, and gave me the case to handle. Joe was confident that his BS and outright perjury would carry the day. It had always worked before. His BS, and his fists, had won him a good settlement with his ex-wife, free of child support, so maybe he thought that threats and lies would carry the day once more, but he was wrong, and after the trial I had a judgment against him, a big judgment, far bigger than he could pay. Joe twisted and he turned and he shimmied and shaked, but after a while I'd located and taken all his assets. It was easy really, Joe had no thought of consequences, and so he didn't lawyer up until it was too late. I went through Joe's finances like a meat grinder, and after a while Joe had one property left, a house, and he clung to that house, for it was rented out, and his sole source of income. Joe lived in the unfinished basement, and he survived on what the upstairs tenants paid him. He cashed their rent checks at payday loan places, paying hefty fees, but it was worth it, because he knew that I'd garnish any bank account that he opened. Joe managed to hide his rental place from me for a while because he owned it through a numbered company, but my investigator found him one day, and followed him home. Joe self-repped his way through the next stage, which took a couple of years, while I punctured his corporate veils in his sad efforts at a fraudulent conveyance, but in the end, I had his last house, the house where he lived in the unfinished basement. Joe stepped out one day to get a pack of cigarettes, and when he came back the sheriff had changed the locks. Can my client at least live in the basement? Joe's lawyer said to me, pro bono, because by this point Joe had nothing to pay lawyers. I knew the pro bono guy, he practiced law nearby. As I was talking to him, I could see pro bono guy's office window across the parking lot from my office tower window. Ask the purchaser, I said, it's out of my hands, and it was. I told Joe's lawyer that the new owner wouldn't let him back into his basement apartment. Joe, a man who had owned this and that here and there and all over town, had just lost the last thing he owned on earth. Except for his truck. He still had his truck left. Joe's truck was this big gas-guzzling beast that he drove around in. It was too old and too frail to be worth seizing, so I let Joe keep it, and I was glad I did that, because now the truck was where Joe slept. Until he made a mistake. He decided to make a little girl the victim of rope. A small mistake which cost him serious prison time. My wife's behavior is absolutely insane and I don't know how to deal with it. My wife and I have been together for 10 years. Recently, she began working at a new company. At first she found it difficult to fit in because she's always been reserved, but after encouragement from me she made friends with a group of girls. At first I was happy she made friends, but then she started going out for drinks and partying. I became concerned by her change in behavior and tried to talk to her about it, but at the same time I didn't want to restrict her in any way. It also started to affect our relationship in the bedroom. My wife wasn't one to initiate intimacy, but with her continued going out she was either too tired or wasn't in the mood. Her company got a new manager whom my wife and her friends had taken a liking to. She began mentioning him in passing, but it got a point where she talked about him non-stop. I questioned her on her fascination with this man and she brushed off my concerns. She even started asking if I regretted not having more experience with women, to which I said no because she is all I ever needed. I swore I thought for a moment I saw a flash of sadness in her eyes, but she quickly changed the subject. She started mentioning open marriages, as a way to spice up our marriage. I was taken back because my wife was never this kind of person. I at first refused, and questioned if this had anything to do with the new manager, to which she denied but said she felt like missed out, but at the same time didn't want to lose me, so this was a safer option. I warned her that she was playing with fire, then reluctantly and naively agreed. So we set some rules, mainly not to sleep with another person in our home. So for a year my wife goes on dates, has one-night stands, then as if I didn't see it coming, somehow is in some kind of relationship with that manager. I on the other hand had a few dates but no one-night stands, because it felt wrong to me. At some point I felt the love I had for her, that pure special innocence of marriage was gone and it was killing me inside. I ended up going on a date with an amazing woman who migrated over from South Korea. Conversation was effortless, she was witty and had a smile that made one forget himself. This of course led to more dates until we were intimate. I honestly never had intimacy like I had with this woman. I never knew a woman could be so giving and make one feel so desirable. At first my wife thought it was cute, but as the months went by she began questioning my relationship with my lover. I promptly pointed out that this was her idea and even she was in a relationship with the manager I was concerned about. She was silent, looked like she wanted to say something but held her tongue. She began coming home early to surprise me with dinner and get the house extra clean. She started coming to my workplace to drop off lunch and began to initiate intimacy in the bedroom. Honestly, if it wasn't for her opening up our marriage, all this would have had me jumping for joy. I barely gave in to her attempts at intimacy, and when I did it was simply to get it over with. Something in me towards my wife died and I could see she felt it too. I asked what brought on this change in her, what was different. The response I got was that she wants to show me that she loves me and is happy with me. I never intended to, but I burst out laughing. I asked about her little group of friends, her manager lover or her one-night stands. She didn't respond that day and simply went to bed in tears. The next day I got home to find her waiting for me. She told me she wants to close the marriage, that this whole experience was a horrible mistake, that regrets everything and wants us to be the focus of our relationship again. I told her to be honest with me and tell me what inspired all this in the first place, and wouldn't you know it, it was her group of friends that planted the idea because of their numerous intimate exploits, and when her manager came around he surprisingly supported that lifestyle and encouraged my wife to live free. Apparently it developed into an emotional affair but only got physical once the marriage opened. She described it as being intoxicated behind the wheel of a speeding car. It was thrilling and intoxicating, but the price of this decision has become too much for her to bear. She sees now that she never needed a comparison, that what we had was truly unique and special, but now she feels like she unalived our marriage and any chance of a life together. I told her I might not to ever be able to see her as my wife again, and this made her break down in front of me. I simply held her in silence as she cried until she fell asleep in my arms on the couch. She has since left her job and cut off contact with all her friends and her manager, and even told me she's willing to spend the rest of her life making it up to me and working her fingers to the bone to be seen as a wife by me, but I haven't cut contact with my lover. My lover quite frankly makes me feel like a man, like I can challenge the world, and my wife hasn't in a while. We have our first marriage counseling session in a couple of hours, not sure how that will go.